Council of Urban Professionals, and we could not be more excited, more honored to have so many of our leading candidates for mayor here with us this evening to talk about some of the most pressing, the most urgent, the most critical issues that are facing New York City in their quest to become the leader of this place that we love about and care about so much. Let me start by thanking Kirkland & Ellis. This is a beautiful space. They've hosted many of our most interesting events, and thank you to Unu Chung, who will say a few words in just a moment. It's really an excellent place and a gathering to have all of us. Thank you to all of our candidates who've done a couple of these so far. 2 or 3, right? Thank you so much to Sally, our moderator. So let me just sort of say a little bit about how this event came to be, and really to thank all of you, because this is not a night to just hear from these candidates. This is not a chance to just hear from them about their plans for the city. This is also an opportunity to think of how each one of us engages in these topics and in these issues as leaders in our own right. And we asked all of you here tonight to ask the things that you most wanted to hear them talk about. And so you said to us, we want to hear about business and tech innovation. We want to hear about diversity and leadership. We want to think about how we can think about education reform work as business leaders, as leaders in our communities. So I really want to applaud you for that, and really that's the spirit of this evening. It's not to say to these wonderful public servants, what can you do for us? It's really to say, what can all of us collectively do to make this city the very best place to live, to work, to innovate, and to raise our families. So please be thinking in those terms as we hear from this conversation. So I'm going to be very, very brief. I'm going to turn over to a leader who I think really exemplifies what creative leadership is all about. And as Unu Chun, our host from Kirkland & Ellis, to say a few quick words, and then he'll turn over to Sally. And please enjoy this evening. Thank you all.
Thanks, Chloe. So Chloe called me and said, would Kirkland & Ellis be interested in hosting the 6 mayoral candidates? You know, I've been a member of the CUP board. I've been here for 20 years. I've done a lot of events with Chloe. I have a tremendous amount of respect for her, always surpassing expectations. I'm like, yeah, that sounds great, but you know, I don't really know them. I don't know how I'm going to get them over here. And she was like, don't worry, I got it. And this typifies a CUP event to me because it always surpasses my expectations. Now, as you see, I didn't know we were going to have these tables here, but you know, we are hosting today, and so on behalf of Kirkland & Ellis, I'd like to welcome and thank each of you for coming here, you know, in their difficult weather, and thank the candidates for coming. I'm sure we're going to have a robust and lively conversation about things like, you know, garbage and bikes, so I'm really looking forward to that. But in any event, I want to welcome you. I also want to introduce our moderator, Sally Cohn, who I've got a chance to speak with for about 45 minutes while we're here waiting for people. She is a progressive Fox News correspondent and a columnist from Salon and a fascinating personality. And Sally?
Thank you. All right, I was told to turn this on.
Good evening, everyone. All right, come on, it's raining outside. We can do better than that. Good evening, everyone. All right. So listen, I'm going to set some quick ground rules and then we'll have at it. And I want to be clear, first of all, this is, I've been told, a discussion, not a debate. All right, everybody got that? Number one. Number two, all right, number two, I want to keep this interesting. Well, TMI, I'm on my 3rd day of caffeine cessation, so if you say anything boring, I will fall asleep. We want to hear things that people in the room haven't heard before. We want this to be interesting. We don't want to hear any standard pat answers. We want to hear not only you talking to each other, but saying interesting things to us that we haven't heard before. Third, I will interrupt you if you're hogging. And fourth, this isn't kindergarten. I don't want, we don't need to show that everybody can sort of take turns. We're not going to do that thing where everybody gives an answer to every little thing, but instead I really want to hear a conversation, and I'll try and steer it if it's not going enough in everybody's direction. Okay? All right. So, I want to start by talking about business. One of the leading questions we heard a lot of folks asking about. The idea of New York City as an environment for successful businesses. These sorts of conversations tend to be framed as, is New York friendly to business or unfriendly to business? I think it might be more accurate to talk about, is New York City friendly toward big business versus friendly towards small businesses, entrepreneurs, innovators, startups. New York City is a great place to have an investment bank or a real estate firm, but it's a very hard place to incubate a tech startup, or a mom-and-pop restaurant, or even a mid-sized minority-owned business. So, if elected, how would you be mayor for all of New York City's businesses, and not just the big ones? We'll start with you, Anthony.
Well, first of all, let me just make a mild tweak on your question. You know, frankly, we've been losing a great deal of finance, insurance, and real estate jobs over the last 10 years. I mean, they're still getting paid very well. It's still the financial capital of the world. But the overwhelming majority of our job creation is going on neighborhood shopping strips. That's where it's happening. Even with the explosion of tech firms, it's still basically going out to Queens Boulevard, someone opening up a flower shop, opening up a shoe store, and trying to make a go of it. And too often, I think you're right, we as city governors, we worship at the altar of the big corporate headquarters, when in fact, if we figure out a way to make it easier for those small businesses to double and triple in size, meaning go from 2 to 4 to 6 employees, we really do an enormous amount to help the economy. One of the most important things I think we can do is to relieve them of the burden that health insurance is putting on them. I think that right now, so much of the expansion of business is getting put right back into health insurance benefits every single day. Nothing is depressing wages in this country and in our city like the high cost of health care. And one of the things I think that New York City should do is get off the sidelines in that fight. We blithely say, you know, we have 300,000 employees, about 300,000 retirees. We're going to provide them 100% of their health insurance. 1.2 million people are uninsured. So if we can figure out a way to take the muscle that we have as New York City government that provides health insurance for so many people, aggregate small businesses and say, listen, you worry about making pizza, you worry about selling records, you worry about doing the things that you do, we'll help you out on the insurance side, and that'll do a lot to create job creation.
All right. Who wants to jump in next? Good, nice example of a short answer.
I'll tell you what.
Go ahead, Bill.
I'll
Thank
jump.
you.
Oh,
You're gonna have to
Okay.
specify.
Bill number 1 and then Bill number 2. Go
All
ahead.
right, I accept that ordering.
It's
That's how it is on election day. I can accept that. Okay.
Rookie mistake.
We're all special no matter what number we come in.
You used up all your time. That's a shame.
Thank you to everyone who's a part of CUP. I've had the honor of being a part of a lot of things you've done and appreciate that you're a wellspring of folks who care about the future of the city and are going to be part of the leadership of the future of the city. Thank you, Sally, for being a progressive on Fox that few the crowd the brave. Thank you. Look, I think the reality of the city right now, to take the question, is no, we are not treating all sectors of business equally or fairly, not even close. I gave a speech at the New School last week, and the central point was that in fact we treat the small business community very harshly. In the last 4 or 5 years of the Bloomberg administration, tendency to over-regulate, over-fine small businesses, particularly clearly in the outer boroughs and in immigrant communities. I did a report a few months back that documented how clear a pattern of bias is towards the outer boroughs when it comes to small business. And so small businesses are a job creation engine, I agree with Anthony, but the city's policies are actually making it hard for them to do that. Meanwhile, we are quick to give subsidies. We have not learned a lot in New York City. We're quick to give subsidies, the city government giving subsidies to big companies which uniformly threaten to leave and then really aren't serious about leaving, and yet they get the subsidy. Fresh Direct just got $130 million. I have proposed taking those kind of resources and applying them to one, lines of credit for small business, because small business is so hungry for credit in this town and suffering for the lack of it. And 2, to making a CUNY education available to more people who need it, and reinforcing CUNY's ability to provide certificates and programs that work in terms of where the jobs are. Most notable example, the tech sector, which is so hungry for educated New Yorkers who can take the many jobs that are available. The tech sector has to go out of this city to find the talent it needs. And it's in large measure because CUNY is not able to provide education that would fit where the jobs are. Let's reprogram subsidy monies for big business that isn't going anywhere and put it into economically strategic investments that will actually help people at the community level get the jobs we have. That's the kind of change of policy I think we need.
Mr. Thompson, what do you think?
Look, I think that New York City has always favored big business and has done a great job of providing subsidies to big business. It is small business in the city of New York that has been under the gun. And particularly in the last 6, 7, 8 years, as you've watched the increase in fines and penalties and small businesses being squeezed. I think if we're going to be serious about growing, and you talk about entrepreneurship, if we're going to do that, if we're going to grow that, then you need to do some things that are different. It is additional spec space and other space. It is coming up with pools of capital And to be blunt about it, entrepreneurs are great, but if there is no capital to help them grow, to help them in business, then we're fooling ourselves. And that is an area that we can use pension funds to be able to invest and to backstop other investments, to be able to grow those entrepreneurs. Small businesses, yes, getting the city out of their way also. And you know, whether it's the pizzeria or whether it's the other small firm, getting the city out of their way and stopping to hit them with fines and penalties. But also, and I know it will come up later in discussion, if the state of New York can focus to grow minority and women-owned businesses, and they have been focused, and yes, I've been involved in it, as many of you know, in trying to get to 20%, where the numbers in the city of New York stand at 3%. If we're serious about growing a small business and a more diverse base across the city of New York, it is in small and middle businesses. And the city of New York has been abysmal when it comes to that. They've made believe as if minority and women-owned businesses don't exist. So I think that there are a number of things that we are serious that we can do to really grow small businesses.
Let me just ask, John next, but I just want to ask, does anyone, both bills just suggested that, in fact, New York City is harsh on small businesses. It's a hard environment. Does anyone disagree with them? All right, so John, go ahead.
New York City is very hard. Well, look, New York City has always been and probably will continue to be for quite some time a very expensive city to do business in, whether you're big business or small business. So it's just a high-cost city. But it's also a high-profile city. There's so many amenities here. I believe we are, in my humble and unbiased opinion, the greatest city in the world. And people want to come here. And people are coming here. Whether they be residents, whether they be immigrants, whether they be companies, large and small, they're coming here. And so what we need to do is, over the next decade, level the playing field. We've got to take away some of the subsidies that aren't doing what they were supposed to do, create jobs. Take the subsidies away from these large companies and developers, many of whom have very deep political connections, not necessarily the economic merit that they should have in order to get our subsidies. And so let's get rid of some of these subsidies, because let's face it, at the end of the day, despite the Bloomberg administration's claims that, oh, you need these subsidies to create jobs, let's understand that the vast majority of jobs created in the city of New York are not subsidized whatsoever. They are created by mom and pop businesses, as well as by large corporations or medium-sized companies that are coming here. And most of them do not get any kind of subsidies. There's only a small percentage of companies that actually get subsidies. Why not level the playing field for everybody? Get rid of the subsidies. And for example, I have talked about getting rid of the subsidy that insurance companies get. They are exempt from general corporation tax in New York City. Nobody else is exempt from GCT. Let's instead, if we're going to subsidize any businesses, give the general corporation tax exemption to 240,000 small businesses across the city. You put a few $1,000s in the pockets of small business owners and entrepreneurs, many of whom nowadays are minority and women run. They are most likely to not take an extra vacation, but to pump that money back into their lives and livelihoods. And if even a fraction of those 240,000 businesses wind up hiring an additional person to help them with the growth, boy, you're talking about real job creation numbers. So at the end of the day, we want to level the playing field, big versus small, but also we want to take away the barriers that still exist that keep minority and women entrepreneurs out of what they should have as equal opportunities in the city of New York.
Thank you. All right, Christine and then Adolfo.
Thank you. Well, Sally, thank you for moderating. Chloe, thank you and everybody in CUP for all you do for our city and for pulling this event together as well. Look, there is no question we need to diversify our economic base if we want to have a more stable and diverse revenue stream, and if we really want to get unemployment down beyond 9.4% and down in communities where it was much higher than that before the recession. The way to do that is to embrace all of the resources in this city, to think about the potential of our neighborhoods as economic engines. During the recession, we added manufacturing jobs at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. What other city can tell you that happened? We can take the kind of model we had at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, put it in place in Sunset Park and some of the yards there, and I believe grow jobs there for neighborhood residents significantly. In the Bronx, You're not gonna hear this a lot, I bet, you may have never heard it before. Let's harness the power of the Cross Bronx Expressway. I know that sounds nuts, I know, but think of it.
The slow power of the cross.
What makes the Cross Bronx Expressway slow? Trucks. What are trucks gonna need to be soon? Greener and cleaner. Greener and cleaner. I find that hard to say together. So, what else do we have in the South Bronx? Old warehouses and old factory spaces. Let's take those and put a city initiative together to make those the facilities where trucks go to become green trucks. They can get there, we know that. Let's have that work be done by Bronx residents. It's part of an initiative of neighborhood-based economic development I put together called Keeping Opportunities Close to Home, Koch, named after our former mayor, to harness the potential of economic development in our neighborhoods. We can do the same thing with tech. And look, let's make our goals here clear. Our job around tech isn't just to beat California. It's to beat Seoul and Tel Aviv and Mumbai and to be the tech capital of the world. Dumbo, you can't squeeze another tech company into there or in Flatiron. That's why we're working right now with NYU and Polytech on a study to create a Brooklyn tech triangle, where we take the back office space in downtown Brooklyn and make it tech space. And then we can build off of what we've already done in the city council with CUNY, where the public advocate's right, their computer science program wasn't what we needed it to be. So we asked folks in the tech sector to rewrite the curriculum for CUNY. And we put a program in place, the first graduates will graduate this month. Under this new curriculum, they get internships with high-tech companies. And we're hopeful after graduation, all of those students in our first pilot, it's small, but we believe they're on track to get the jobs they interned in. We also have a program at LaGuardia right now in partnership with the Queens Coalition from the tech community to take adults who have no computer experience and teach them coding to make them viable for tech jobs. And the things that's great about this is we in the council and CUNY asked the tech sector to develop the curriculum, so we know it's going to be well respected. That's a way we can some ways we can diversify our economies and get New Yorkers in jobs. And let me just mention one other thing we did in the council, which is important. We extended the unincorporated business tax credit to freelancers. Because today's freelancer is the head of a small business tomorrow and the head of a big company after that. That's a tax rate that is going to drive our economic growth in neighborhoods and with women and people of color across the city.
Thank you, Mr. Carriello.
That's almost a filibuster.
Oh.
Or an excited speaker. It's a fine line between the two.
Now.
Thank you very much for this opportunity, and thank you for CUP for the important work that you've been doing since 2007. I'm very excited to be here. Breaking news, we started greening the truck fleets in the Bronx when I was borough president. In fact, we had a beer distributor located in the Bronx called Manhattan Beer, and go figure, and we took at least 60 of the 125 trucks that were diesel fuel and turned them into alternative fuel trucks, and that march will continue. Look, everybody here will acknowledge that small business generates the lion's share of new jobs. It drives our local economies all across the United States. The unfortunate thing here in New York City is that we have started to treat small business like the government's ATM. Every time that we want to raise money, we raise a fee, we raise an assessment, we raise a tax. We try not to call it a tax. So that environment has become regressive or a disincentive for investment. But I think there's another element here, and it's the difficulty that local businesses have with doing business with the government. They go through a regulatory maze that is difficult. They have to go to multiple agencies to be serviced. They spend sometimes hours, half days, days, and weeks trying to get permission to do things, whether it's from the health, environment, or any other type of agency that gives permission for people to conduct business in this town. So we need to continue to consolidate and create a one-stop shopping environment for our local businesses. And third, I think everybody understands that in order for us to be competitive in the new small business growth area, New York City is going to have to invest heavily in broadband infrastructure. And you know, it is about competing with those other global cities, but it's also those other American cities like Boston and Raleigh-Durham and Silicon Valley in the Bay Area, and there are other places that are emerging that are making significant investments in infrastructure. So one of the things that I'm proposing as mayor is to create our own New York City Infrastructure Trust. The mayor of Chicago is last year rolled it out. Other cities recognize that the federal government has gone out of the infrastructure business and that local municipalities are going to have to raise their own capital to invest in infrastructure. And we can do it right here in New York City. We need to do it. We need to do it right away if we're not going to lose our competitive edge.
Right, thank you. Everybody went, right? All right, audience, this is an audience participation moment. Did anyone learn anything new in that? Anyone? Anyone? Okay, guys, we're going to have to try a little harder this next round. Oh, there we go. All right, hands good, okay.
Apparently this side learned,
Good
this
test.
had already heard us.
Oh, wait,
Listen, we're going to do a mix of, those were pretty good succinct answers. We're going to do a mix of those and some more rapid fire answer questions. So in 15 seconds or less. We got a lot of questions from members about public-private partnerships. Folks were talking about, you know, subsidies can be bad. There are obviously some very successful public-private partnerships that I can't say very quickly in New York City. From each of you, and I'll go in reverse order down the row quickly, one bold public-private partnership you would like to implement as mayor for the benefit of all New Yorkers.
I mentioned it at the end, creating an infrastructure bank where you create a vehicle for investors. It's a lease back. The city remains the owner. It's not privatization. We allow the private market to invest. We reduce the risk on the taxpayer side, increase the risk on the private side, and raise the necessary capital to modernize the city.
Thank you. John.
We've been, during my time as controller, we've already utilized economically targeted investments to continue public-private partnerships. But what I'd like to do over the next several years, if I had my druthers, is to implement a vast system of mandatory inclusionary zoning, which is a very strong form of public-private partnership that not only provides benefit to the private entities, but ensures that the public benefits as well in these types of public-private partnerships. Mandatory inclusionary zoning basically is a way to use our air rights in the city of New York to come up with the capital that's necessary to expand our affordable housing construction, which we clearly need. But the bottom line with public-private partnerships, or P3s, is that we've got to make sure the public benefits as well as the private companies.
Thank you.
Yeah, as far as a great P3, and obviously looking at things they're trying to talk about, like the Tappan Zee Bridge and others, those are interesting ideas in the city. I think, you know, if you're going to be able to use a P3 and do it creatively, perhaps in turnkey situation with some housing, with affordable housing, I think that might be an area to be able to build, turn it around, and present it, you know, to the city in some different ways. I think that's one of the ideas that we could be able to look at, so that that's our benefit, and work it out in collaboration, in a public-private partnership.
I want to expand on a public-private partnership we launched a couple of weeks ago, one that we're doing with the Robin Hood Foundation and Harvard University. Through this funding, we're starting with a pilot with about 20 middle schools. All of these middle schools have reading levels of 7th and 8th graders, 3/4 of them below grade level. This funding is going to help us expand the school day and spend those extra hours working on reading, tutoring, literacy. Harvard Ed Labs has done this model with math very successfully in other cities. They've never done it before around reading and literacy, and we think it's going to be enormously successful. When we get the data back from these 20 schools, I would want to work to expand that public partnership to every middle school in the city that had those same kind of reading challenges. I also think the tech public-private partnership I referenced, where we're asking them to help us fix what we need to fix in CUNY and in our public schools, as we've seen so successfully with groups like Mouse, we really can build on that as well.
Well, I'll say a related one. As a public school parent myself, something I am passionate about is creating a formal partnership between the business community and the academic community in this town and every one of our high schools and ultimately every one of our middle schools as well. We have some great examples of schools or schools connected to specific industries or specific companies that have been stunning successes in terms of creating internships, mentorship, a constant connection between the school and the workplace and helping to show young people a pathway forward, which has been harder to see in bad economic times. I want that formalized in each and every high school and ultimately every middle school in this town.
Idea number 62 in my book, Keys to the City, is to make New York City the insourcing job, call center job capital of the world. Here's how it worked. At the turn of the century, all these call center jobs, many of your firms might have done it, outsourced jobs to places like Hyderabad, places in India. Why? Because they had cheaper labor. That trend reversed when more and more consumers were saying, we just don't like that quality. And also, we were finding there wasn't sufficient diversity of language there. Now, in 2013, with a growing Chinese middle class, a growing Indian middle class, a growing middle class around the world, there's a need for one thing above all else for these call center jobs: language diversity. What does New York City have more of any other place on earth? Language diversity. Here's how the partnership would work. CUNY would say, we will help train the workers, find them, particularly among our graduates or our participants. We will then, we, the city of New York, would say, listen, there's plenty of space, particularly in places like Queens, that is normally not taken advantage of enough for back office space. We will make it so that if companies want to have great call centers, they don't have to go to Manila, they don't have to go to Hyderabad, they're going to be able to do it in New York City and find every single language they could possibly want within a 5-mile span of their center in Queens.
All right, I'm now going to hijack the entire agenda. I'd like to hear Mr. Weiner explain issues 1 through 61 in his plan. Curious? Okay. Maybe later. All right. I'm actually glad a number of folks brought up a level playing field, middle class. We got a number of questions about the middle class and the fact that the middle class is leaving New York City in droves. And let's be honest, again, the standard response politicians would give here would be something about education and making us safer. What else? What else that we haven't heard, that we haven't talked about? What one specific thing would you do as mayor to make this city more affordable and livable? I'll start with Mr. Thompson.
If you don't build more affordable housing in the city of New York, not just, everybody thinks of affordable housing as low-income housing. If we don't build more middle and moderate income housing, that's the thing that drives people out of the city of New York. That's what so many people in this room have complained about over the years. How difficult it is, how expensive it is to live in the city of New York. The mayor put forward an idea to be able to use land at the housing authority, to lease it for luxury housing, and to be able to use the revenue from that at the housing authority. I disagree with that. I think we have land there. It is an opportunity to be able to build moderate and middle income housing on the grounds of some of the housing authority development. It's looking almost to do a new Mitchell-Lama program. That's what can keep people in the city of New York. In the late 50s and early 60s, you did that. And you created neighborhoods, you kept people in the city of New York, you grew a middle class. It is an opportunity again to be able to do that. And that's where we have land. You control the cost of land. You also can you control the taxes. That starts to drive the cost down, and you can work out construction in a number of different ways. If we're talking about keeping middle class people in the city of New York, that's how you get it done.
Y'all don't need to raise your hands. You can talk to each other. Come on,
So, look, I
jump on in there.
The controller's right. The biggest issue, one of the biggest issues for middle class New Yorkers and working class New Yorkers is housing. And let me tell you, every time I speak to a corporate leader actually and say, what's the best thing the city could do to help you? Presidents of enormous companies, hospitals, etc., they all say, develop housing that our employees can afford. They say that's the hardest thing that they have in front of them, luring the best people to come or stay here, is the cost of housing. So this is critical to the future of the city. And there's 3 things we have to do to make sure we address this challenge. 1, build more affordable housing. Almost all of the money we get from the federal government, which we want to keep getting, to build affordable housing is for low-income housing. So the city has a responsibility to add in both on the lowest ends around homeless and the middle-income end. I've called for the creation of 40,000 new middle-income housing units over the next 10 years. That would be the biggest program since Mitchell-Lama. You do that about $300 million a year. I do part of that through new borrowing, given how well our capital budget has been managed and the interest rates. The other half, we've already identified savings in the budget. 2, we need to make sure we take every unit we have in the city of New York right now that is substandard and make it standard and hold those slumlords accountable. I was outside buildings in Brooklyn today, 3 buildings in Sunset Park area of Brooklyn that are in terrible financial distress because of an over-leveraged mortgage. We have to hold the banks or the note holders who own those buildings responsible. And we, in this case, through laws we've passed in the city council, the city can now go in, fix those buildings up, sue the landlord for the money, and take ownership if we need to. We saved 500 homes in the Bronx and others in Brooklyn with that program. 3, we need, the biggest way we've lost middle-income housing is the erosion of rent protection. The weakening of rent protection is the biggest loss of middle-class housing we have ever had. And when I'm mayor, I'm going to lead Tenant Lobby Day in Albany to get the law repealed, the Erstat law that prevents the city of New York from being in charge of its own tenant protection. Those 3 things, new, our own rent laws, and preservation will get us on the right track for real middle-class
I
housing.
think housing is important, but it's also, it goes beyond housing, because it's, let's face it, housing is just one component of the cost, the high cost of living in the city of New York. And even as in recent years the cost of living has continued to skyrocket, including the cost of housing, the wages haven't kept up. We have had greater economic inequality, a widening wealth gap that's worse than the rest of the country and growing worse faster. In the country, 1%, the top 1% controls 17% of the nation's income. In New York City, the top 1% controls 33% of the city's income. Last time there was an economic recovery, there were increases in incomes. But almost all of that went to the top few percentage of New Yorkers, while everybody else barely kept pace with inflation. So it's about housing policy, and of course we need to build more affordable housing. But we also have to implement economic policies that again begin to level the playing field and introduce a much more reasonable level of economic equity here. I've got a plan to reform the income taxes so that we get away from what we essentially have right now, a flat income tax system in the city of New York where no matter how much you make, you basically pay the same rate of tax. And replace that with a progressively curved system of income tax rates so that more money winds up in the pockets of the middle class and the working poor, and therefore generate the local economic multiplier effects that we need for sustained economic recovery. We also have to look at prevailing wage and living wage statutes as well, because those all serve to uplift the working poor and therefore start to expand the middle class once again.
Sally, that's okay. Sally, we've done this in the past. We built Co-op City, we built Stuytown, we built Parkchester, we built Starrett City. We built middle-income communities where families were able to remain in the city, were able to be part of, we benefited from they being part of our tax base, and an educated citizenry that was active. And we've ceded that space partly because we've become over-reliant on federal funding that encourages only the very low-income housing development, and we've created a regimen at the state level that also rewards only the very low-income housing. So we've ceded that middle, and what we need is a chief executive in this town who understands the role of the middle class and that we cannot be hollow in the middle. We need to ensure that we have a place for young families to grow in this city and to remain here. But it's not just about the housing production, which we know how to do. We've modeled these programs before. We know how to package them financially. We've got to create quality neighborhoods. It's got to be a neighborhood that provides the amenities for families that we often have surrendered to other land uses. So there's got to be a commitment to open space. There's got to be a commitment to a user-friendly city. One of the things we're going to need to do is to go vertical, especially around our transportation nodes. We need to get people out of their cars. We need to create walkable, livable, green communities. That's the trend. Auto ownership is going down. My hope is that congestion will go down with the reduction in auto ownership, and that we create a more robust and usable and user-friendly mass transit system that will allow families to have a higher quality of life in the city.
Sally, I want to take your question and just suggest, I think that it's true that politicians love to provide odes to the middle class. But I think the discussion needs to evolve in this city rapidly. I think at this moment in our history, the middle class is not just shrinking, we're actually in danger of losing the middle class altogether. It's literally in danger of disappearing because the combination of the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression and a massive affordability crisis in our neighborhoods is just pushing out huge numbers of New Yorkers who grew up here who can't afford now to live in their own neighborhood. So the response to that cannot be business as usual. I think you're talking about two key elements of government policy. On the affordable housing front, it is taking what Mayor Bloomberg did. Some of it was helpful, but not in net terms, because we lost so much in the way of affordable housing out of Mitchell-Lama and out of rent regulation. To really change the numbers, I proposed 200,000 units over 10 years using mandatory inclusionary zoning. I agree with John Liu on that. A much tougher approach to the real estate industry, requiring affordable housing as a precondition of development, and the use of our pension fund dollars. I've suggested at least $1 billion immediately be put into the development of affordable housing. Using a resource we have, we control our pension fund dollars, also creates jobs for people in need in the city. That's the first part. The second part, we have tools to create greater equity, greater economic equity in the city we're not using. We need to, first of all, take the living wage concept and apply it as fully as possible. I'd like to see it reach first thousands, then tens of thousands of New Yorkers. That means when we subsidize a company, we demand a living wage in return. Second, paid sick days. We've made some progress lately. I want to go a lot farther, because when a family has paid sick days, and right now hundreds of thousands of folks still aren't going to enjoy that privilege for a while, it means they have some insulation economically against the kind of loss that can occur if you're sick or your child's sick, the kind of income loss you achieve in that situation. So I think we have to recognize, if we're not doing all of these things, if we're not using every possible government tool for equity and for the creation of affordable housing, it will not be the same New York City anymore, and it will bluntly not represent our values of inclusion. It will be a much more exclusive place, and a place where we don't see the opportunity that we've historically expected from our city.
All right, last but not least.
Yeah, can I just posit the idea that the average New Yorker is poor today? The average income, and median income is $45,000 a year. Sure, the poverty line is $26,000. We have 20% people below that, but realistically, if you're making $45,000 a year in New York City, you're poor. You got a couple of kids, you're very poor. There's no place you can afford to live. And we dislocate our shoulders, patting ourselves on the back because we've had job growth the last few years, but let's take a look at what they are. We're trading middle-income jobs for about 1.3, if you do the math, low-wage jobs that are so low-wage, they're essentially poverty-wage jobs. And we're compounding the problem that we're taking those breadwinner middle-class people that used to have those jobs, and we're making them to compete for those low-wage jobs. Those low-wage jobs, who they used to go to? People who didn't have college degrees, young men and women of color, people who are getting further and further out of the mainstream of the job market because they have to basically compete even for those first rung ladder jobs. And yet what do? We brag that we outperform the economy of the country as a whole. The unemployment isn't as bad as it is elsewhere. When in fact those jobs that are being created are basically creating a status quo, low income and high income. Now why should you care? You're successful people, you're professionals, you're doing okay. Your firms, your companies cannot sustain themselves just dealing with other rich people. You're going to run out of them sooner or later. There's only so many oligarchs who are going to buy our apartments. There are only so many millionaires who are going to sue each other. Sooner or later, we need middle-class people who are going to have money in their pocket to go out and buy products
buy services, buy things. If we're gonna be a city that hands off to the next generation a better city than we found, we can't do it this way. So the first thing that needs to happen is we need to change the vocabulary at City Hall of what we consider success. It ain't good enough just to say, I created another job at a Red Lobster. I don't know what a Red Lobster is, but it's a thing, apparently. It's like a Lundy's to people in Manhattan. Yeah, no, I know, but you might have them in Midtown. I don't know, it's like a Lundy's for tourists or something. The fact is, one of the things that we have to do, that we should start with right away, is we at government should help these people unionize. No, nothing is better than helping people rise into the middle class than a strong union that says, you know what, you can't say that if you open up a business in New York City, we're not going to provide health benefits, we're going to make you go to a neighborhood emergency room and send the bill off to everyone else. It ain't going to work that way. We're going to hold you accountable, we're going to make sure you're not able to do that, and we're going to make sure that you treat your workers well. If there's one thing that scares somebody who has a middle class wage job, is they go off to their work site and they see more people working part-time to get away from paying benefits, fewer and fewer jobs, more things being outsourced to contractors. That has to change, because if we don't save the middle class, all the rest of the stuff won't matter, and all of the high-wage, fancy apartments being sold in the world won't change that dynamic.
All right. So we're getting to that weird point where now I have like 10 questions in 10 minutes. So what we're going to do is start to try and make the answers a little bit shorter before we
can all answer at once.
The fun round. That would be great. All right, this is an important issue for CUP that we do want to make sure we get to. Look, we know people of color comprise 65% of New York City's population. Here we are in a room of exceptionally talented leaders of color. CUP is launching an initiative to provide literally binders full of resumes to the next mayor. According to 2010 data in Los Angeles, 48% of top mayoral advisors are people of color. In Houston, 45% are people of color. In New York, it's less than 30%. How will you, as mayor, ensure diversity, women and people of color, is a priority in your administration? And to be blunt, would anyone here pledge to do the best on those numbers?
I think I'll do the best, because I've already done it. If you look at my leadership team in the controller's office, I've got 8 deputy controllers. No offense to anybody here, but very few white guys on my leadership team. Almost all of whom are women and minorities. And look, it wasn't by design. It was because I asked my transition team to look far and wide in New York City, look for the best talent. And in New York City, this is the leadership that they came up with. In contrast to the current City Hall, where there's not a great deal of diversity at the current City Hall. And Mayor Bloomberg doesn't even make any bones about it. In fact, he makes it far worse by saying that there's a shortage of diversity at City Hall because we only look for merit. And he doesn't even understand how offensive that kind of statement is. That because he chose to stay within his comfort zone and not look in all the neighborhoods and communities and all the talent that exists here in New York City, he can only come up with an administration where everybody almost looks alike. So we've got to diversify the ranks of City Hall, and by turn, it will trickle down into all the city agencies, the commissioners. It'll even go into the city contracting with MWBEs. You got to start with the top.
You know, I would agree. The first thing, and those who remember my office as controller, remember the diversity that existed there from the top to the bottom. That people on, whether it was chief investment officer, deputy controller for pensions, first deputy controller, I could go on and on. It was a diverse group. The thing about, and also the business that we did, it was, we had increased the amount of diversity, who we did business with, who the New York City pension funds did business with, who managed our money. We grew that and grew it dramatically. But the one thing, and I will agree with John, it's the lesson that the Bloomberg administration truly doesn't understand. It was the point that was made in 2009 in that race for mayor, that there was more diversity in the Giuliani administration than there was in the Bloomberg administration. That's a true number when you look at the top. The only difference, and the thing that I believe, and it does start at the top, it is a question of who the deputy mayors are, who the assistants in City Hall are, and it just doesn't end there. It's a question of who the commissioners are and what they look like, and understanding from the mayor that diversity matters, that we are looking for the best and the brightest, and we want to cast as wide a net as possible. when you say that and when you let your commissioners understand that, and you hold them accountable. And to be honest about it, yes, you look at the composition of staff, and you hold commissioners accountable, and let commissioners understand in a number of ways, the most extreme being, you don't work here anymore because you don't have a diverse, group of people who work for you. You don't have the best and the brightest. I think that's that's a way to send a message that you have a diverse group of people that is the best, that is the brightest, that is talented, that looks like New York City. And I think that's important, and that message needs to be sent. And last but not least, and I'm not trying to filibuster, I know we're trying to be quick. The one thing, and CUP, and let me give credit to CUP and to Chloe and others, after not even after, while Andrew Cuomo was running, CUP embarked on an effort to be able to put together great names and to be able to reach out to people across a very diverse spectrum and compile those names. Carl McCall is on the transition team. It was great having Carl there. Carl worked with CUP in putting those names together and came up with some excellent names that were put into play. That's a way, not waiting until an election. So it's good to see that CUP is going down that path again. Don't wait till an election. Put those names together now. People who want to serve in government, people who want to be involved. And then as elections end, those names are ready to go. That's all. Let me commend you for doing that work.
I want to echo Comptroller Thompson's gratitude to CUP for what they did as it relates to Governor Cuomo, and I don't think any of us who are aware of that process had any doubt at all that before the second the election is certified, the winner will have lots and lots of names and resumes and suggestions, and they will keep coming, and that's a great thing. Because New York City's greatest strength is our diversity. There is no question about it. And we need for the government to be as successful as it can possibly be, for all of that diversity to be within City Hall and the leadership in city agencies. Right now, 42% of the senior staff in the Speaker's office are people of color, and about 40% women. I want to do better than that even when I'm the mayor of the city of New York. But we need to make sure it is absolutely at senior level in City Hall, and the deputy mayors and the senior advisors, in the commissioners, the directors of mayoral offices, but also we need to make sure it's reflected in the contracts that we give as the City of New York. Make no mistake, the economic power the City of New York has is enormous. And that's one of the reasons I've already pledged to appoint a chief diversity officer within the mayor's office who will report directly to the mayor. That person, among other jobs, will have to monitor all of the MWBE goals in every city agency with commissioners and with the chief accounting and contracting officer, the ACO, in every agency. And those statistics, MWBE stat, will be made public on a quarterly basis so that as mayor and as with the chief diversity officer, we can be held accountable of what agencies are succeeding and what ones aren't. And when we're not, even when we are, I know CUP will have ideas about how we can do even better. All right, briefly, please.
Yeah, so look, I think we are not even close in New York City right now. I served in 2 administrations, locally with Mayor Dinkins, federally with President Clinton, that were devoted to looking like New York City, looking like America. When you're devoted to it, you can do it. I think the goal is literally to have a representative administration echoing exactly the composition of the city as closely as possible. The talent's there, and the talent is there in New York City. One of the fallacies of the Bloomberg years was that you had to have an Ivy League degree and come from out of state to possibly qualify for service in New York City. And in fact, when you look at the lack of diversity in the Bloomberg administration, it was a lost generation. It was a lost opportunity over 12 years to actually credential New Yorkers for more important jobs in the future and to bring in people who represented all the communities of the city. And I think the mayor did not understand something a lot of us do understand. I understand that you have to hire people at every level of government if you want a positive trickle-down effect of people turning around and bringing up more and more people from their own communities and providing that next rung opportunity. It doesn't happen if the people who are chosen are unrepresented. They simply will not seek out talent from the grassroots and from neighborhoods unless they represent those neighborhoods. The 20% goal is something we have to do, but it has to be a commitment that's not just about certain types of contracting. We have to change our approach to procurement and use that tool to not only help MWBE businesses, but New York City-based businesses more and more. We have to fix our approach to the pension funds. We're not helping emerging managers to get opportunities to the level we could in this city, the financial capital of the world. Our investments should more and more be handled, again, by companies that look like New York City, so that opportunity can trickle down to more and more people. So I think this is one of the areas where the Bloomberg administration failed most profoundly, and where the next mayor has to turn things around most sharply. I am energized to turn around right away, not to carry over bad habits, but to turn them around right away.
I'll just be brief. I think that by and large the mayor has had good top management people. I think they've done an okay job, but it's a false choice. I mean, I think that diversity as a management question brings enormous value. When you have people that come from different places, when you come people with different experiences and they bounce off each other, you wind up getting more innovative, interesting thinking. It just turns out to be a much better problem-solving model. Much of what you're doing as a mayor is managing the day-to-day operations. But the important stuff is sometimes how you're pushing at the envelope and trying to figure out stuff. How you're trying to figure out ways to communicate that you understand, you empathize with their challenges, and you're trying to deal with it. When you bring people from different outlooks, I mean, I don't know if the mayor of Indianapolis counts, but when you bring people from different outlooks and they get into a room and try to figure out problems, they sometimes come up with a better thing just because of their different perspectives. But I think, look, I've got 9 senior staffers on the campaign. Only one is a white guy. We're a very diverse organization. There are people coming in from all around the country who want to be part of this campaign. But I have to tell you that when it comes to running the city, the notion that you cannot both say, I am going to have extraordinarily talented people and I'm going to have an extraordinarily diverse administration becomes a false choice. You can have a pretty good administration and have a whole bunch of white Ivy League guys, but you're more likely to get more interesting outcomes if you have a diverse set of staff around you.
Clean up. My mother used to say, dime con quien anda y te diré quién eres. Tell me who you walk with and I will tell you who you are. My deputy borough president was an African-American gay man from Brooklyn. My chief of staff was a woman, a white woman. My council was a Latina. And it just goes down the line representing who we are as a city. I think leadership has to come from the top on this issue. It's got to be public and untimid. Obviously there is a wealth of talent in this city to fill just about any job with and achieve the representation of who we are as a city. I think, however, that the most important thing that we need to look to is a public commitment from the mayor that they're committed to diversity. Of course, diversity is good for better management and better ideas. Of course, we can set up the systems, but there's got to be a public, vocal commitment from the chief executive that, yes, we are going to do business. We have a $70 billion budget. We have a $1.3 trillion economic footprint in this region. There is absolutely no reason that we don't reflect the diversity in talent and wealth creation in the city of New York.
Okay then. So just so I'm clear, when I said 70% of New York are people of color and that at least in Los Angeles 48% of their top mayoral appointees are people of color, will everyone at this table, show of hands, beat that number?
Beat Los Angeles?
Los
Yeah.
Angeles.
We'll always try to beat Los Angeles.
Final
The
question.
pride will beat Los Angeles.
And in basketball too. Final question. There were a lot of questions about leadership. So in the interest of, this one's going to be real brief because we've run out of your precious time and everyone else's precious time. A lot of people wanted advice on leadership, your top lessons, your top things you wish you'd known that you know now. I want to know, so let's distill that down. If you could have a tattoo on your forearm of your one key leadership motto or mantra, mine would be like, done is better than perfect, although I hope that's not the case tonight. But what would your leadership tattoo read? Let's start
Wow.
and go down the line.
You start with me. Thank you.
Unlike the diversity, no obligation to actually get the tattoo. Don't worry, it's okay.
Hey, Adolfo, quote your grandmother.
If you have a tattoo, you can tell us what it says.
Wow, this is getting a little racy here. I don't want to know if you have a tattoo.
You should have seen my other question. All right.
I can't show you where it is.
That's why I said I don't want to know. This isn't John answer.
The forum is degenerating
Totally,
rapidly.
This is called giving us time to think about the answer. That's a very good question. I would say that my leadership tattoo.
Tell you what, I'll jump in and save you right away.
Thank you, Bob.
I'll jump in and save you. If there,
You've been thinking about this
Yeah.
for a while, yeah.
there are two things, and it's a big tattoo.
Get one, Bill.
It's two tattoos, man. Go with two. The first thing that I always advise young people when they ask, what should I do? It is always do the best that you can in any job. And that is one thing. But the second one is do what you believe in. And I think that that's the leadership. That's the one thing that at times people don't do. Stand up and do what you believe in. And if you do that, even if people disagree with you, you will feel good about it. You will feel good about it. That's the leadership tattoos, I believe in.
Adolfo's ready.
Trust your judgment.
All right, there you go. Anthony.
I would say don't wait. There is nothing that you need to do in life that should have the verb wait attached. If you're waiting for a return call from someone on something, there's something you can be doing out there to gather the information. If you have an idea for something, you can put it off to tomorrow, but you should not have the word wait in your vocabulary. There's always something you can be doing, and if you're mayor of the city of New York, there is always some way that you can be pushing to solve the problems, and they're going to tell you you're being impatient, they're going to tell you they're tough on your staff, they're going to tell you
Yeah,
you're
we've
a
run out of
hard
names.
ass. The answer is don't.
with body counts, no body
Don't.
A very painful tattoo by now.
The tattoo is don't wait. The rest was the
There we go.
explanation.
Thank you. An excellent tattoo. All right, who else? Bill or Bill de Blasio?
I would take a quote from the French revolutionary Danton. No, it's nothing violent.
I lost the pool. I bet that wouldn't come up in this debate.
Audacity, audacity, and still more audacity. I think a lot of people spend time telling themselves what they can't do and talk themselves into what they can't do, as opposed to recognizing that they've got more in them, and the only way to find out what you've got is to go out and try it.
Christine?
Just do it. That's a Nike quote. I'm not going to take that quote.
For me, the tattoo would be, this may be the only moment you have. There is no guarantee of a tomorrow. So it's going to be like an Angelina Jolie size tattoo, so bear with me for a second. This may be the only moment you have. There is no guarantee of a tomorrow. So seize this moment, and even if you are full of fear, act as if you are completely fearless as you are moving through it.
And
I would say fulfillment. Fulfillment, do what you want to do and do what makes you happy. You all have great careers here. I lived that life. I was a young professional yuppie for many years. Just worked a few blocks away from me at PwC. And I gave that up to run for a public office, to become a member of the city council. My wife Jenny questioned working twice as hard at half the pay, but she said, well, look, if this is what you want to do, then so be it. And she's been very supportive. So I'd say fulfillment is what you want. Do what you want to do. Of course, I add a motorcycle to my tattoo, but weighing in on that, and that's not going to happen.
And you just won the idealistic motorcycle rider vote. Listen, fulfillment's a great way to end this. This has been a very fulfilling conversation, and I'm sure the New York tattoo artists of the city will be grateful for all the new ideas. Thank you. Let's give a thanks to all the